Okay, so then we're going to jump into our Q&A. Michael, Charlie, super excited to be able to jump into this with you guys. And our first question here is actually for both of you. I want to talk to you about, and Charlie, I think this one, I'll kick it over to you first, more lines up with those annual objectives. So you've got these goals, you've got these objectives, but how do you allow for flexibility when it comes to accomplishing some of those? I think there's some frustration behind this question because sometimes you need to change your goals due to changes in customer demand or business conditions. So the real question is, how do you allow for flexibility?
Business conditions change over the course of the year? I've never heard of that. Yeah, I mean, if the last 2 years have been a great example of that, right, where we thought we were going to do one thing, we end up doing something totally different. The strategy deployment process, Hoshin Conry, that I was talking about, traditionally kind of stays the course. Like once you set those objectives, you'd like to follow through on those over the course of the year. I think the reality of that is that if there's something really significant that comes up, obviously we can get the team back together and talk about changes to the plan for the year. That seems appropriate to me. It seems reasonable to me. I'm usually a little more pragmatic from a consulting perspective or even a leadership perspective than I am kind of hardline. So I would allow for that in an exception basis if circumstances warranted it.
Michael, what would you add?
Yeah, I totally agree, Charlie. And I think what I find is the flexibility on the leading indicator metrics, or maybe the metrics that are more where the action is. You know, resetting the targets, resetting the milestones. You know, maybe the numerical target for the next quarter.
Yeah.
But really, those bigger objectives about profitability, about meeting customer needs, about growth, those really shouldn't change much. Even in the course of a pandemic, you still want to be profitable. You still want to be growing at least at some rate. So I don't see much change on the high-level objectives either.
Right.
So Michael, I'll kick this next one over to you first, and then Charlie, you second. But
Sure.
In some cases, companies don't have the mission or the vision, and top brass sees it as fluff. And so what advice would you recommend, or even any practical steps that you could provide to be able to help manage up so that you can influence it and help top leaders be able to say, hey, there is some value here in having a mission and a vision?
Yeah, Kirby, I just love that question because it's real. It happens a lot. People see the mission, vision, values, the posters, the advertising, and you just get the eye roll. And so as a leader or somebody that wants to really align and change the culture, you've got to start having those conversations. It goes something like this, you know, hey, I'm working on a project and we've met our objectives. How is that helping our customer? How's that helping our company? How's that helping our people? And just by asking questions like that, you're going to start a dialogue around mission, vision, and values without even using those terms. You know, what value are we providing? Why did we work on this project versus that project? If we finish this project on time, what is it going to do for our company? And what's next? So start with those conversations. The other thing is, you know, take your time. It's not going to happen overnight. People's attitudes are not going to change. Even the mission itself, the wording that you use, you know, it may sound like fluff on the first draft, and you may need to refine it so it reflects who you really are, and people have time to digest it and process it. So even the process of developing it can change people's attitude on the fluff if they're involved, if they're part of this iterative process over time.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that if you're trying to sell this up, it's not fluff, right? If your organization is really struggling with how do I fit within the context of my company and the direction that we're going, and so if it's because of a lack of a vision or a mission, it might be a conversation with your leadership to say, hey, I don't understand the context in which I'm working today, and can you guys help bring clarity to that, or can you all bring clarity to that by defining that for us, for me. Yeah.
Great advice. Thanks, guys. Okay, so this next one, Charlie, is for you. So you mentioned objectives in your talk, and sometimes companies will have objectives that are 5 years long, and it just feels like it's way out there. Yeah. How can you properly scope objectives? Sometimes maybe it should be 5 years, sometimes something else.
Yeah, you know, the strategy deployment tool, right, and methodology that I talked about kind of helps us define those, right, those 3 to 5 year objectives. But then the important piece is that we take that big kind of, you know, ugly thing and we break it into annual objectives. And I think that's the key transition, which is take something that's large and break it into smaller pieces that are more manageable. And so I think from that perspective, having an annual plan is important. But I think the importance of the 3 to 5 year or these longer term pieces is that we don't go from year to year and just have different direction every year, that we're moving towards something that's longer in term, longer in nature, that's getting us closer to that vision or to that mission. And I think that's the important piece. So yeah, I guess my point is understand that there are these big things, but break them down into pieces that are more manageable.
So Michael, this next one is for you then. So sometimes a mission, a vision, a strategy can get lost in the day-to-day noise of firefighting. And sometimes it's not noise, it's a legitimate fire, we got to put this out. And sometimes that can go from a day or two to a week or two, and again, the mission and the vision, they get lost. So what can you do to make sure that it doesn't get lost and that it's always in front of people, or even if it's not in front of someone for a day, like you can kind of get back to what's important and then like where you fit and then why you matter?
Yeah, boy, it seems like we've been in that mode for a while in my job, in my area, constant firefighting for the last 20 months. And I think it really comes back to that, you know, that leadership skill of communicating, reinforcing, just bringing it up in conversation. You know, hey, we're putting out this fire, but the bigger picture is we're serving our customer, or we're going to grow here, or we're going to develop our people this particular way. It's as a leader taking time out to reinforce that mission, the vision, the values, reminding people why they're there. Yes, this problem will solve it. Yes, it will pass. And you know, we'll be back on to bigger and better things very soon. You know, I love the example. I visited Autoleave, which is a company that makes airbags, a number of years ago, and there was one of their competitors had a major recall, and so their volume at Autoleave went up tremendously, almost threefold. And you'd talk to an operator on the floor, and you'd see the chaos. You'd see the production rates. You'd see trying to keep the lines running, trying to keep the raw materials flowing through the workshop. And you'd say, you know, what are you working on today? You know, tell me about your work. And they would say, well, I'm saving lives. And I was shocked that they would say that amidst all this chaos. And yet there was such a strong sense of that mission and that vision that even throughout the chaos, every employee was focused on the main thing, which was we make airbags, and really we're saving lives. And they had a chart out front that showed how many deployments of their airbags had gone off, you know, how many units had exploded and saved lives. And that was their metric as they walked into their factory every day. So they kept that mission in front of them by the metric that was in the lobby and the conversation they were having day in, day out.
Okay, so then this next one is for both of you. Sometimes top management can have just too many breakthrough objectives, and you want to be able to give them feedback, but you don't want it to be a career-limiting move. So, Charlie, I'll kick this one over to you first. Michael, you second.
Yeah, so from a strategy deployment perspective, one of the pieces I mentioned was that you need to tie the resources to the work that's being done. And I think when you go through that exercise, if you don't have strong team tied to each of those annual objectives, leaders that are driving that work. Like if you find yourself with a team that's run too thin or being assigned too many things, chances are you have too many of those objectives working, right? And so I think it's to answer the question, like I think you need to tie those resources or connect the resources to the plan and make sure you feel good about it.
Yeah, I would just add that you know, it's okay to have competing metrics, multiple metrics. Again, I mentioned the concept of production reporting versus metrics that motivate and move you forward. And you may have a team that's got to focus on safety and efficiency and productivity and output, and yet at the end of the day, maybe their big thing is just changeover. And so to encourage the team to say, hey, we're gonna hit our standard work, we're gonna make that changeover as efficient as possible, and if we do that every time we have that opportunity, all those other metrics will fall in place. Now back to the leadership team, and we're still reporting all those metrics, but we know internally in the team that we're focusing on changeover and hitting the standard work and hitting the time. And over time, educating the management, bringing them out for a tour, saying, yeah, we're working on a changeover today. Come see the work. Come see why this is important. And again, all those other metrics will fall into line if the main thing stays the main thing.
Okay, so this next question is for both of you as well, and if you could share maybe just the first 2 steps that you'd recommend or that you've experienced in the past. But lots of member companies, they have a mission, they have a strategy, it's clearly communicated, it's been practiced, they're working on executing, but they don't necessarily have a scorecard. How would you start to develop that scorecard? Charlie, I'll kick it over to you first.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So you've got the mission, the vision. Again, for me, it's following the process, for the strategy deployment process. It's sitting down with that top-level leadership team and translating that into what do we want to accomplish this year, right? And once you've had that conversation, it moves pretty quickly into what are the metrics, and like Michael said, what's the balanced scorecard that supports those annual objectives. And that conversation leads to what you're asking, Kirby, which is like, here's my scorecard for the year. It's balanced, it's supporting directly, and we've made the connection, we've made the tie to the annual objectives, and that feels pretty good as far as the first step from my perspective.
And I'll just piggyback off that and say, with respect to an individual or maybe a team effort, ask that person or that team, how do you know whether you're winning or losing? How do you know whether you're having a good day? How do you know whether you're moving forward even incrementally? What would you measure? And maybe the second part of that is the data available? Is it meaningful to the team? Is there a single source of truth? Many of the things I had on the slide to sort of qualify that metric as something that you can actually use. But honestly, when you ask people what they think, what they would measure, how they gauge their progress, they're going to give you great ideas, which is not going to be the same as production reporting. It's going to be metrics that are meaningful to them and that will motivate them. And maybe those metrics are only temporary. Maybe maybe you only measure that and chart that and make it red-green for 30 days. And then you say, well, what's the new metric? Is there something that's maybe better or different that we also have data for, that's meaningful, that has a single source of truth?
Okay, so then this next question is our last question, and it's kind of a follow-up question from the previous one, so I'll kick it over to both of you again. Charlie, will go with you first. Mm-hmm. But you've got the scorecard in place, and there's a bit of a rub. So the mission and the strategy are more centered on being customer-focused. Let's be really effective in how we serve the customer. But the scorecard is driving behavior that says, no, let's be super efficient. And there's this rub in between them. So that's just one general example. But oftentimes, the mission and the strategy say one thing, and the scorecard's incentivizing another thing. What could you do? What practical steps could you take to make sure that there's that clear alignment there when you need to reset expectations with a scorecard, or dial it in a different way?
Yeah. Hopefully you don't get to that spot, but that's not really an answer. I mean, you should start with a well-balanced scorecard, right? And I think to answer the question, there naturally is going to be tension in your scorecard, right? Like, if we only focus on productivity, we might miss quality. And so I think there's some healthy tension within a scorecard, and that makes sense to me. If it's really out of whack, you might need to have a little bit of a course correction. And I think what I like about scorecards is that you try to keep those throughout the year, right, and try to focus on that. But there's always an opportunity to make an update, and whether that's once a year or maybe more frequently, you can do that. But I think the tension's probably normal, I guess. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. Tensions create scorecard. Tension in scorecards is natural. It's how they work. I can't disagree with that at all. There might be a couple different situations here. One is you may have a temporary emphasis. You just had a big quality complaint, so you rally around quality for a period of time, even though you're not going to hit your productivity or your cost numbers or some other objective. The other one is just as a leader, you might take a step back and do an exercise where you map these metrics, you map them not only to your mission and vision, but also to the behaviors that you're observing, and really have an honest discussion about what are we seeing in the workplace? How are people behaving? How are they reacting to the scorecard itself, the metrics, the discussion that happens around whether you're red or green? It's a humbling exercise. You may get more information, more feedback than you want, but I think it's a necessary exercise if you've gotten to that point where you've created a massive amount of tension. Let's just lay it on the table. Let's be honest. Metrics drive behavior. They do. So let's call it out. Let's identify them. Let's talk about them.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate your willingness to be able to share with all Manufacturers Alliance members on how to be able to align your mission, your strategy, and scorecard, and then overcome some of the issues that can get in the way of successfully doing that, so that everybody going into 2022 can be rolling in the same direction and ultimately ready to take the hill that I think we're all going to climb next year. Thanks for joining us.